Hello, friends, and warm welcome to today's episode of Marketing Ecosystem. My name is Dr. Rushana Khusainova, Senior Lecturer in Marketing and Marketing Skills Expert. And today's discussion is about something I'm really passionate about. It's quite a new concept of regenerative marketing. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome today's guest, Professor James Norman, who is a professor of sustainable design at University of Bristol. Very warm welcome, James.
Thanks.
I've met James and we have met as part of the career development seminar series that I was facilitating at University of Bristol. And I got really interested in the concept of regenerative design. I don't know whether it was because it's a sustainable and really rings true to my own values, or because my husband is also an engineer, and some of the things that you were talking about around engineering design were kind of things I was familiar with from our home conversations. And it then I attended your book launch event. It was Regenerative Engineer, wasn't
You're
it?
a regenerative structural engineer, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, it was fascinating, really. And that's how it got me thinking about marketing should also be regenerative, right? So that's the journey. Jay, thank you so much for agreeing to come and have a just really informal, relaxed discussion about this. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you arrived at regenerative engineering?
Yeah, for sure. In 2019, there was something called the Structural Engineers Declare movement. It was actually architects declare first, and then structural engineers were like, we should be part of this, which was essentially engineering practices around the world and architectural practices around the world making pledges to commit to doing better in terms of the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency. And in those pledges, the word regenerative appears a number of times. And I went to a talk. It wasn't a talk. It was the iStructy Awards, actually, ceremony in 2021, I think. And there was a short video about what needs to happen. And a chap called Chris Wise, again, was talking about regenerative design. And I realized that structural engineers have no idea what it means, including myself. And I realized that all of these practices had signed up to a commitment to do this thing that they didn't actually know what it was. And it was important that we found out what it was. I decided to write a book. I actually decided to write it that night at the award ceremony. I was like, right, let's just write a book on this. I set myself the goal of writing a book in a year from conceptualization to delivery. So that was November. So I gave myself from the 1st of Jan to the end of the year. It actually took just over 2 years to write the book.
Mm.
And that was because of a number of things. And actually, this is partly a marketing conversation. So the first version of the book we wrote was very much we don't know anything about this topic.
Mm.
We're going to learn as much as we can about it, and we're going to tell you about our journey and share our story with you as the reader. And I think there's a lot of power in that in terms of taking someone with you. But the publisher, who are the Institution of Structural Engineers, so they're like a learned body, they represent structural engineers, kind of when you become a chartered structural engineer, you become a chartered structural engineer with them. And they were our publisher. They didn't want a book like that. They wanted a book which was authoritative and where rather than the learner, I was the expert.
Mm.
And so we reframed the entire book, and which is why it took a bit longer to write because our reviewers were like, well, it's all very nice, but actually you need to present yourself as the expert. So we kind of went through an entire rewrite process, and we did that 2 or 3 times to get to a point where we were happy with the outcome. And in the process, we learned loads, and actually we did do lots of positive changes to the book. So we started off like with it being very much our personal journey, and so all of the case studies that we gathered were on our own sort of doorstep. So they were very UK centric, really kind of Bristol Southwest centric case studies. And a lot of the best work that's going on in the regenerative design space is happening outside of the UK and other parts of the world.
Okay.
So with the new version, the updated version, we went. Sadly, I didn't visit, but I just did online meetings with people in the Philippines who were doing amazing work around building houses out of bamboo and creating a whole industry doing that in really exciting ways. I spoke to guys working in Rwanda who designed this amazing university campus for their agriculture college out in Uganda, project called Rika, designed by Mass Design. So I was chatting to them. And so it was really exciting to kind of see what work was going on around the world and to gather that. So the final version of the book is something I'm very proud of. And yeah, it kind of really, I think, cemented what regenerative design was in kind of an abstract way, but also what it might look like for a structural engineer to be regenerative.
Oh, that's so interesting. So, I understand it's a very holistic approach, right?
Yeah,
It's not just how you supplement, I don't know, cement with some other more sustainable materials.
yeah, indeed.
So, what would be the most regenerative kind of designed building? What would that look like?
That's a good question. And my answer is going to be one of those really annoying answers where there is no most regenerative design building because I think you
Mm,
have to think about context, you have to think about outcome. And to me, what we should be working towards is a built environment, so a global scale,
mhm.
which is no longer releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere,
Yeah.
that is enabling biodiversity to flourish rather than decline, is, actually removing microplastics from our environment, is reversing the impacts of ocean acidification, whilst also enabling people to flourish and to become educated and to have decent jobs and have access to food and medicine and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a that in a way, regenerative design is only going to be successful when we've got there. So that's like the goal. That's where we're trying to get to. And then the question becomes, what projects can we do now which would enable that to start to emerge? And I think that's a much more interesting question. So things like Rika, what I loved about Rika, which is this project in Rwanda, was it wasn't just about creating a building. Through
Mm.
the process of creating a building, they generated whole new industries which use much more sustainable forms of construction than were being currently used in Rwanda. They wrote design codes which could then enable other people outside of Rwanda to also enable these sustainable forms of construction to emerge as well. So it created kind of a cultural shift and is still creating a cultural shift. And so there are these projects which act as catalysts, which enable bigger change. And I think when we talk about regenerative marketing, which is really what this is all about, to me, that's what regenerative marketing is about as well. It's about how do we generate conversations or topics or ways of seeing things which don't just impact on the individual product that is being marketed or the service that's being marketed, but actually change the way we perceive the entire system and engage with the entire system. So I think a really obvious example would be the palm oil adverts with the monkey in the bedroom, saying it had nowhere to live. Like that raised awareness of a much bigger issue than just selling a single product. So to me, that feels like how marketing could be used as a way of enabling a product to still continue to be utilized, but in a way that feels like at the same time we're changing the way people perceive the world and the things that they can do.
Yeah, I think it's indeed it's quite a grand and systemic approach, isn't it?
Yeah,
Not just changing one thing. There is education that plays a big part,
yeah,
and just discussing this, being contributed to the discussion in the ways we perceive business operations. So one of the things that I'm interested in, speaking of regenerative marketing, I think all marketing should be regenerative in the long run,
yes,
and we should be moving towards that. But I was looking at definition of marketing, and there are a couple of official definitions, one by Chartered Institute of Marketing here in the UK, and they do talk about it being management process that encourage well that aims to discover the needs and wants of consumers and then satisfy them profitably. And I had a chat with Institute of Marketing, and I said, well, how about satisfying the needs profitably, but how about the planet, the long-term longevity of the
yeah,
world, and things like that? And they said, well, we're aiming towards triple bottom line implications, which is profit, planet, and people.
yeah,
And I think this should be in definition because every little helps, as they say. Even things like, having few extra words in definition would then hopefully impact how we perceive marketing as a foundation, right? And so just looking at not just profit for money, monetary profit, but other things, because in the long run, money wise profit won't matter if our planet isn't, a living thing anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, I would challenge, I think I heard this on one of your previous episodes as well. Um, Regenerative is not the same as the triple bottom line definition of sustainability. And it's different for a few reasons. It's different because regenerative design considers human and living systems not as separate, but as one combined thing that we rely on the natural world, and the natural world actually does rely on us. I think humans can intervene in positive and negative ways, but actually there is a symbiotic relationship, or there can be, that at its best enables both to flourish. And I don't think that's captured at all in the triple bottom line. And the goal of regenerative design is for those systems to survive, thrive, and co-evolve. And again, I don't think that's captured at all in the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is a very different way of conceptualizing the issue. And for me personally, having worked in industry for quite a long time and had those conversations about the triple bottom line, I actually think it's not necessarily flawed in terms of its philosophical position, but the way it's been interpreted and used is fundamentally flawed because everything is measured by money, and basically it's saying unless this sustainable approach is the same cost or cheaper, it's not a goer. So it's not actually a triple bottom line. No one is adding up the three columns. They're only looking at the financial column, and then they're saying if we can achieve some social good or some environmental good at no expense to us, we're in. But if it's going to cost us, then it doesn't matter how good it is, how much it's going to save. We're not interested. Which to me is a very limited and very negative, really, view of the potential that we have to make a positive impact.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, that, if it's not going to cost us much, it will also make us look good, i.e., greenwashing, then we'll do it. Yeah,
Yeah,
really good point.
yeah.
Okay, so let's look at there's a concept of marketing mix, right? That looks at product, price, place, and promotion. So with regenerative marketing hat on, let's look at product. So product,
Mhm.
it would be something that's designed 100% with people and the planet and regenerative design ideas in mind. Is that right? And you have an example of the denim company that we were discussing.
Yeah, so a company that I really like is Hyatt Denim. They produce jeans, and they make jeans in a place called Cardigan in Wales. So the guy who set it up used to run a company called Howie's, which was the first time I was aware that clothes could be sustainable. They talked about organic cotton and the fact that their clothes were made in nice factories in Turkey, I think was what they said. And before then, I hadn't really thought about where my clothes came from. Anyway, Howie's got bought out by Timberland, and then I think they bought themselves back. But
Mm.
by then, the guy who set it up left, and he set up this jeans company called Hyatt Denim, which started making jeans in Cardigan. And Cardigan used to make a lot of jeans, and then, as many things in the world, it got outsourced. So the jeans factories closed down in Cardigan, and their mission was to get Cardigan making jeans again, but in a different way. So they're not trying to compete with sort of the mass-produced items that are made around the world. Instead, they wanted to make jeans which were, let's be honest, they're very expensive,
Mhm.
but they're durable. They come with a lifetime of free repairs. So I have a pair now, which in fact my wife has banned me from wearing because they've fallen apart so much. But I've sent them in 3 or 4 times to have them repaired and patched up, and each time it kind of gives them another year or two of life before they need to be sent in again. They have this whole thing called the No Wash Club, which encourages you to wash your jeans as rarely as possible. So their minimum goal is 6 months, but they encourage you to try and not wash them for at least 2 years. And again, it's about trying to change culture. So the reason this is regenerative is it's changing culture. It's changing the way we view our clothes as not something that's disposable, but actually something that should have longevity and should be repairable. It's changing the way we think about how we clean our clothes because actually we don't often have to wash our clothes as often as we think. And every time you wash your clothes, that's where most of the environmental impact is in your clothing, especially if it's a product that is durable and you're not wearing it once and throwing it away, becomes the cleaning of your clothes repeatedly. So actually encouraging people to reconsider how they treat their items of clothing in that regard as well. And the other thing about it is both of those things are transferable into different items of clothing. So it could become a lifestyle choice to do that for other things, not just the things that they provide. So to me, they are helping people think differently about the whole clothing industry. They don't they now make to order, so they don't have mountains of jeans which at the end of the season, if no one's bought them, they just throw away because they don't want to devalue the product, so they don't have a big sale. They actually make them to order. They do lots of things that are all about kind of changing the way we perceive our clothing, and they have the whole local community based kind of approach to production. So they live in the community, they work with their community, the jeans get made in their community, and it's about bringing kind of commerce and life back to that community in a really positive way as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating and so impactful. So if we look from marketing point of view, the product is of super high quality, locally produced as much as possible, utilizing local community. Moving on to pricing, of course, it has to be premium pricing, but the business model then accounts for all those repairs and all this high quality product. That's
Yeah.
reflected in pricing. Hopefully, I'm really hoping making them profitable financially as well. And then moving on to promotion. So they are emphasizing this idea of community, the no wash club. Also, you mentioned, I think, the email marketing as well
Yeah.
initiative. Yeah, can you tell me a little bit
Yeah,
more?
so they send out a weekly email, which is quite a fascinating read.
Mm.
And they just look around the internet and find stories to share and products to talk about. They big up other products that are coming from their local community. And so it's a really nice way of marketing their product. I assume it's incredibly low cost. They're not paying loads of money for adverts because they're using their email as a vehicle for talking about their product. But they also just talk about loads of other stuff. You're not hit by the first six items on their list of their products. Often there's nothing about their products, or if there is something, it's right at the end. They're
Mm.
just, you feel like you're joining a community of people who believe in the fact that things could be done different or better, which feels a very nice way of doing this. And I think there are a few different organizations that I know of that advertise in this way, I guess, but this feels the most positive community sort of building approach that I've come across. And the guy who runs it, David Hyatt, has written a book called Do Mail, which is all about how his approach to the email. I guess there is that thing about market saturation. So when they started doing it, which was over 10 years ago, I didn't know of anyone else doing that. I think it's become more common that people do this, and there's only so many emails you want to get from different companies telling you about all of this different stuff. Like one or two a week, it feels like a nice amount. If you get more than that, so they got in early. So it's not that necessarily other people could replicate and do the same thing, but it's more to learn from the fact that they saw a gap, they took the opportunity, and again, it's not just them spamming you with stuff about their product. It's about them really telling you about loads of interesting stuff, which then builds a relationship. I probably buy a pair every 2 to 3 years tops,
Mhm.
but I'm constantly aware of the brand because these emails drop in my inbox every week.
Yeah, and creating that brand loyalty, as they call it in
Yeah,
marketing, and also just adding that value. And so it's not just about the product, indeed, it's about the shared values, the community, and interesting stories, right? And
absolutely.
so yeah, that leaves us with the final P of marketing, which is place. And where do they sell their jeans? Is
So
it
they're
just
based in Cardigan, and predominantly they sell via online. But they do have a shop in the factory in Cardigan that you can visit, I think, in theory. Although they often don't have very many jeans to try on because they literally do make them to order.
Mm.
Um, and they have other things going on, which I know are not completely novel, but if you change size, shape, and your jeans no longer fit, you can send them back and they give you a voucher and they resell the jeans.
Mm.
So I guess those jeans might be in their shop as well in Cardigan. But I think it's the fact that they are really committed to the place and they really like the place is part of the identity of what they do. And also they're bringing positive change into that space as well.
Yeah, it makes me think about some other brands like, for example, I've just learned recently about Viva Barefoot shoes. They
Yeah.
have a website called Reviver kind of thing, where they indeed resell shoes that didn't suit someone or someone just kind of grew out of or didn't suit them for other reasons. To create that community of people who care about minimalist shoes, about their feet health and
Yeah.
things like that. So shared values again, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another company that I really like and have been subscribing since the beginning is On have a shoe called the Cyclone, which their whole branding for that was you don't own the shoe. So they provide the shoe as a service. So they send me a shoe. When the shoe's worn out, I send it back, and they have designed the shoes to be fully circular. So they're designed to be deconstructible. They can recycle every single part of the shoe. They can then use that to make new shoes. And so I don't pay for the shoe. I pay a monthly subscription to have trainers on my feet. And again, I love that idea, and I love the idea of circularity in the design. And I think one of the really big positives I hope they take from it, and I don't know if they are, is as they get these shoes back and they're able to see like where they're wearing out, where things aren't quite working, if they could update this bit or change that bit, actually maybe the shoe would last a couple of months longer than they currently do. Like almost they're able to get all of that user information from the worn out shoes, which most trainer manufacturers would never see because at the end of the life you just stick them in the bin.
Mm. Yes, and that's very interesting. Again, I'm really amazed at the role of education, how companies can and should and often try to educate consumers. What
Yeah.
I'm observing, though, it's quite interesting that it's something called willful ignorance. I've recently learned, and maybe it's, I should have known ages ago, but I've recently learned about cotton, conventional cotton farming. It's
Yeah.
farming, like how cotton is grown, it requires so much water, and then how it's harvested in some countries with the use of child labor. And there are some casualties sometimes as well in the process of harvesting. And I used to think of cotton as a just this nice, breathable, healthy, good for everyone kind of fabric. But it isn't. And I'm now honestly, James, scared to find out even more harm that could be done potentially by the clothing choices I make.
Mm.
And it's almost scary in a way. And that idea that, to stay fashionable, you need to replace your jeans or any other kind of clothing, handbags, accessories, every so often to just stay fashionable in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah.
And how do we educate consumers and everyone in society that this isn't the way, perhaps? Do you have any?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that very first point, and I think in my industry, so I'm a civil structural engineer, and we design huge buildings, but there's a massive impact in the materials that we use,
Mm,
and I think we have been willfully ignorant, like almost we don't want to know, and I think the first step is very painful in terms of choosing to find out where your stuff comes from. But actually, once you've taken that first step, that's quite an exciting moment because it means you realize there's opportunity for change. So you could only consider buying clothes which come from cotton suppliers, which are, ensuring that I'm not an expert on cotton suppliers, but yeah, I know that some of the companies that I buy from talk a lot about where their materials come from, the way that they're manufactured, kind of the growing processes used. So you could start actually becoming interested in that, and you could even go further, and you could write to the people that you buy clothes from and say, look, I love your clothes, I buy them, but I'm really concerned about this topic. Can you tell me about how traceable your materials are? Where do they come from? Actually, unless you start supplying that information, I'm afraid I won't be able to buy your clothes anymore. So you can actually start to become not just someone who learns about it, but you can actually start to be an agent of change. And I think often, I don't know, this is a made up number, but I think companies, when one person writes in, they assume that the lots of people are thinking the same thing. Because actually, in our culture, most people can't be bothered. What we think doesn't translate to actually spending the time to write the email and send in the thought. And so if you're writing in and saying this is something I'm interested in and I want to resolve it, then you might be surprised at how quickly they listen to that and take it seriously. It might have more impact than you think. And then we can start to talk about what needs to change and how do we enable that change.
Yeah.
Is it possible to have this product which is still affordable,
Mm.
because actually a lot of the solutions that we need to be affordable globally as well, not just for, I think we talk about affordability in the UK, but actually it needs to be globally affordable, but it also needs to be affordable in terms of water. Water is becoming more and more scarce. It needs to be affordable in terms of, we don't want to like cost people's lives or have significant harm to people through injury and things like that. So we need to be weighing up all of these things. How do we make this a good solution for everyone? And I think those conversations are really valuable.
Yeah.
And you start to say, well, what are the metrics and how do we measure this stuff? And I'm a big fan of metrics. I'm an engineer, but I think the first thing is to say, I'd like to know, and asking the question. And the metrics follow those questions. And it might take a while for the metrics to come, and then we can really start making progress. But if we go, actually, this is too big, I don't want to engage, you never have that conversation and nothing ever changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite empowering that actually individual consumers can contribute to the change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, speaking of regeneration, which I've learned from you is different from
Yeah.
regenerative design, right? And speaking of regeneration, though, I observed some companies, they try to do their best. Now, an example that comes to my mind is Brewdog. So it's beer brewing company based in the UK. And I do think that I do know that they supply now internationally. But anyway, I really don't know anything really about their sustainable agenda, sustainability, and business processes. But one thing I observe they do and promote is they go as a company something like once a year or something like that and plant loads of trees.
Mhm.
So it's just something I've read in LinkedIn. And is this good enough to start with, at least?
So I think it comes back to the conversation we had at the beginning around what is regenerative, and regenerative is not about individual projects or individual companies. It's about us
Yeah.
globally kind of correcting the current trajectory of our environment in terms of carbon emissions, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, and the kind of the human side as well. And so I don't know enough about what Brewdog is doing to say is it regenerative or not, but I think the regeneration is a very different thing, and the regeneration I think it has maybe different meanings in different spaces. So in the built environment, so designing buildings and where we live, often regeneration is actually about gentrification. So it's about taking an area which is run down, and it's about knocking down all the buildings, starting again, building big, nice, posh buildings. And it doesn't just, kind of change the value of the land, it also impacts the lives of the people there, which could be great, but actually might mean that. And for me personally, I live on a council estate, and we were involved in a consultation process where they were building a new estate next to us. It wasn't a council estate, a new estate next to us, and they were reviewing whether they should knock down our estate as part of the process. And on paper, it would have brought more wealth, it would have increased the value. But actually, there are people who've lived there for decades, up to 50 years, who would have to leave the area, and they couldn't afford to buy a house in the new version of the estate. And therefore, they would have to leave the area completely, and they wouldn't be able to afford to live anywhere in the city, because I live in the cheapest part of the entire city. So they'd be forced to live in rural communities, which in and of itself isn't bad. But actually, if you're an elderly person with no mobility, no access to a vehicle, you've gone from a space where you've got bus access into town to suddenly being very isolated. That doesn't seem like an overall win. And so regenerative would, rather than gentrified, say, how can we enable the best possible outcome for the people already here to, kind of houses that are energy efficient, sustainable, that actually we can bring green into the space, we can reduce air pollution. But what we're not doing is gentrifying and kind of pushing out a set of our community. Everyone is thriving within the current space.
Yeah, so it's good to know again, once again, that this regenerative marketing, regenerative design is very much systematic approach
Yeah.
to all these important areas and stakeholders, right? Okay, so James, my final question. Can you just tell me, maybe share a few concepts or ideas of regenerative design that we can borrow from regenerative design in engineering and take it and bring it into marketing and business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've kind of already covered them in some way. So when we to think about a brief for a project, we might ask ourselves four questions. The first one is how can we aim higher in the system? So if I was thinking of a marketing campaign, I might ask myself, how can I not just explain my product, but bring about change across this industry, which I think we talked about quite a lot. The second one is to re-establish interconnection. So I explained earlier on that regenerative design is about understanding that we as people are interconnected with the natural world and with each other. And so how do we re-establish that sense of interconnection with the natural world and with our communities? And how do we design things so that we create those connections? So the Hyatt denim example I gave you, one of the things I really liked about it, an email, I guess, is quite one directional, but I'm learning about not just the company, but their community, other products that come from that community, other initiatives that they're seeing. And to me, I feel more connected into that community now than I would do if I wasn't part of that product. I think interconnection is also about reconnecting with nature in a profound way and actually learning from nature, which at the most core level is just about spending time not inside built environments, but in natural environments and really utilizing that and dwelling on that and thinking about how can we bring forward some of the things that we see here in our environments in which we live. And again, I think you could do that through marketing. The next one is to aim to build symbiosis. So what we mean by that is really where are the win-wins? Where are the opportunities for more good to happen across the board? So a really simple example might be in forestry, where at the moment, if you're going to look after a forest well, you actually have to do selective felling to remove some of the trees to enable the other trees to really flourish. And that's quite expensive to do. But if there were a market for those trees that we were cutting down, we could then encourage the flourishing of the forest, because actually a poorly maintained forest is not as biodiverse and is not as good as a well-maintained forest. But we could also generate products that we could utilize to make into buildings or into paper or whatever it is that we want to use it for. So we then end up with a win-win. We're winning, nature is winning, we're absorbing more by allowing the trees that are left in the forest to grow more. We're enabling more locking in of carbon dioxide by utilizing the trees we've cut down in buildings. We're locking them into things that could last 50, 100, 200, 300 years. So that we're winning on lots of fronts and we're generating profit, we're generating income for people. And I'm not anti-income. I think we all need the money to live. It's just thinking about how do we balance income with all the other needs that we have. So again, in marketing sense, I think the question is where do we see the win-wins? How do we enable these things to occur? It might be about benefits for the community and for the organization or whatever it might be. And then the final one is to enhance the capacity to self-organize. And this is maybe a bit more tricky to explain, but we basically efficient systems often prioritize putting all your eggs in one basket, to use a saying. And so that is the cheapest way of doing things, but it's not the most resilient and it's not the most robust way of doing things. And we've definitely seen in the last 5 years what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket and then there's a major problem, whether it's around supply of food, whether it's around global shipping patterns and having everyone go through one particular way, and then a boat gets stuck. Yeah, I think in the Panama Canal, and it had a huge knock-on impact. All of these approaches, by making everything as efficient as possible, you also make it more vulnerable. And so in regenerative design, we're looking not to maximize efficiency, but to maximize our ability to adapt and evolve, which actually means we need lots of different ideas. We need lots of different people doing things. We need lots of different opportunities. And at the moment, we don't know what the right answers are to a lot of the big questions we have. So we need lots of people to try, and some of those will then emerge as the best ways forward. So we need systems that are not continuously focused on how do we just make everything really big, but actually how do we enable lots of variation to occur and then enable the best ones to project, kind of go forward and to grow.
Yeah, so it's again that large scale systemic approach that's long term oriented and that's not
Yeah.
just looking at short term gains, but it's like
Yeah.
really the long term thinking about future generations and our not just our immediate future, like tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that, James. It was very, very interesting. So I think now then, if we were to borrow some of these ideas and bring it into the concept, the new emerging concept of regenerative marketing, and as you know, I'll be presenting our paper on regenerative
Yep.
marketing at Academy of Marketing Science Annual Conference in Canada this year. So that's really, really exciting. I'm hoping that will generate or contribute to continuous discussion on the topic. So bringing that into marketing, I think probably we can start thinking about defining regenerative marketing as broad business philosophy that's really long-term oriented, that's strategic in nature, and that looks at stakeholders, not just the shareholders, the employees and customers, but also people at large, societies, communities, community building, nature,
Yep.
the health of the planet, of course, right? And that uses those principles of regenerative design, starting from production of the planning, the ideation of the product with regenerative design thinking, but also regenerative leadership and management practices throughout the classical marketing concept with these themes of people and the planet and regenerative design principles weaved into the whole process of marketing. And although it sounds very grand and big, I think you just highlighted that there are simple and small steps that we can take by just not being passive passengers, but actually actively engaging with brands that we believe in that could be better and could be doing better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was very, very interesting. Thank you so much again for actually teaming up with someone from business background and in academia, of course, there's a school of engineering and a business school, quite different disciplines, right?
Yeah.
It's really exciting talking to you and being inspired. I'm learning so much. There's so many things I can bring into my own teaching of marketing. But James, I'm so, so amazed at how you adapted your style into completely and fully speaking business and marketing terms, like you're a marketeer yourself. This is
Oh,
very,
thanks.
yeah, well done.
Well, do you know, I'm appreciating you're trying to wrap up, and I'm now going to talk again. But I've been teaching first year design and looking at different design models. And one of the early models is called Total Design, and it does two things which I think relate to marketing. One is it the selection of the product that it looks to develop. It checks whether there is a market for it. So that's like the product bit of your four Ps, right? Right at the beginning. And then at the end of the process, it's no good to make a product and then just not tell anyone it exists, right? You have to
Exactly.
explain what it is. You have to explain why it makes people's lives better. So there is a marketing need. And I think regenerative design has got a need for authentic marketing, which has integrity, but also is spreading the word. And I actually, like writing books and talking about this stuff, to me, that is part of marketing this philosophy. And I think that's really important. And I think we are foolish and naive if we think the idea will just propagate without any marketing. Now, what that looks like, how you do it, absolutely up for discussing. I think that's really an important discussion. Like I said, it's really important to think about how do you do it with integrity? How do you do it in a way which matches the values of regenerative design rather than, kind of other values, all of that sort of stuff. But I think it's essential we have those conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you very much again for coming and being so helpful, bringing in all this knowledge and wisdom. And yes, thank you very much, everyone who's listened to this podcast, who watched us on YouTube. Yeah, do let us know what you think and speak to you next time. Thanks very much, James. Bye
Thank
bye
you.
now.